Thank you. Good morning, fellows. It's a pleasure to be here, especially after what I heard and saw and listened to yesterday. Some of the slides that I had prepared in total innocence of what was presented yesterday actually illustrate and I think hopefully reinforce some of the messages we heard. So what I will attempt to do then is to set the stage a little bit for why the Global Alliance was created, what it's doing, and perhaps where it will go. And no news to anyone, you just have to see what the price is on 23andMe with the cost of whole genome, whole exome sequencing falling faster than anything that anyone ever could imagine. We are in a tsunami of data. That doesn't mean we understand it, doesn't mean that it's validated, doesn't mean that it's clinically useful, but for $99 now you can receive your own readout. So yesterday, in this context of big data then, you also have to look at how science itself is changing. This is a map of scientific collaborations from 2005 to 2009. I called up the cartographer and asked if he had a more recent one, and he said no, he was working on it because since that time we have projects such as H3 Africa, Malaria Gen, and so on that would light up, I think, other continents as participants in these global international collaborative initiatives. This is an August 2nd map of connections, IP addresses, so pings on the internet. Again, you can see that certain parts of the world are not yet equitably accessible and participatory in this international crosstalk. But it is fascinating to see what these maps now illustrate in terms of potential and actual communication. This is my favorite, but I have to read the data that goes with it. This is a map by Andrew Lamb that shows a network of collaboration across research papers on Hep C virus between 2008 and 2012. So they did a social network analysis, and they showed that the 8,500 spots that you see are the single authors, and the lines between them are their collaborations on papers. So again, a beautiful network illustration. This is my actual favorite. If you've been following complex systems theory, you will know, following Barabasi, our Italian colleague, that they're increasingly showing that single genes can be, or that different genes can be associated with different diseases. And it calls into question, as the National Academy of Science did in Washington 2 years ago, what is the taxonomy we're using for disease classification, the WHO codes, when in reality what's coming true is what we all learned as children, that the knee bone's connected to the ankle bone connected to, and so on. So this is absolutely beautiful. It illustrates a lot of potential, but most of all, the complexity in issues of actual clinical diagnosis. So in the world of big data, then, we're not just talking genetic data. We're not just, as Jane has just shown, talking about the need, such as the FORGE project, to bring data together, especially for rare diseases. The more data we have, the more we share, the more we can understand not only rare diseases, but gain statistical significance in our search for the causes and treatment of common diseases. Though you can't, as most of you in the room know, because we talk about health, which is very broad, discount then the effect of socioeconomic factors, climate factors, all the instruments and possibilities for putting these different kinds of sources of data together. I have a colleague in the Netherlands who's actually using geospatial imaging, combining it with population data coming from these large national biobanks that have existed for over a decade now, and he can actually zone in not only on clusters of health or susceptibility or resistance, but socioeconomic factors that contribute and demographic factors, environmental factors such as access to public transport, fresh food, and so on. But he's scared to publish his maps because he thinks that the property values of the individuals living in those regions might suffer as a consequence. So we get new social ethical concerns that emerge from the power, if you like, the potential of big data. So what is this Global Alliance for Genomics and Health? It looks kind of markety, as I would call it, looks fancy. There's actually a group of volunteers. There is actually no money behind it. It's sometimes what I would call, please don't print this, loosey-goosey, in the sense that it takes the World Wide Web as its model. It wants to be epigenetic, it wants to be dynamic, it wants to be flexible, it doesn't want to incorporate, not even as a nonprofit. So how is it going to work, and what is it going to do if it does succeed? So note the verbs in here is that the unique feature of this is it's the Global Alliance for Genomics and Health. So it's the bridging alliance to bring our genomic knowledge to and integrate it into the health, with health knowledge and the healthcare system. So it wants to have a framework of harmonized approaches in a prospective international, i.e. global effort to catalyze, make sure that the data is responsibly shared, drive certain projects, and demonstrate the value of such integration. So some of the language you'll find, to me, is action language, or all verbs: convene stakeholders, catalyze the sharing of data, prospectively harmonize, so you don't have to backtrack and re-enter data because it's all being entered differently, such as dates of birth, weight, height, and body mass index, and so on. Act as a clearinghouse, foster innovation, and commit to responsible data sharing. So what really happened was that a number of funders, NIH, Genome Canada, INSERM from France, and so on, 50 people met in a snowstorm in end of January 2013. Then we had an 80-person paper writing exercise in groupthink, and started to look for other organizations, institutions that would join in this mission of integrating eventually, hopefully, genomic data with clinical data in the healthcare system for better patient care and treatment. So by December of that same year, there were 4 working groups: governance, executive staff, and so on. Today, I keep forgetting what date we are, but somewhere in the middle of September, we have 220 partners in 30 countries. So from a fledgling sort of volunteer effort with no money, and there still is no money, these partners, including life sciences and informatics, Google, Amazon, IBM, GSK, forget the other pharmas, are in here. Now, there are only institutional partners, there's universities, there's institutions, research centers, hospitals, and so on. Yesterday in our breakout session, I brought up the fact that and someone even mentioned yesterday afternoon during their presentation, there are no more blockbuster drugs. There's now stratification going on inside big pharma as well. And stratification in terms of how they're targeting their research and the different way that they want to start running their corporations. So and they maybe have been forced to do this in some sense by the European, the EMA, when it announced that it was looking for companies when they wanted to register new drugs, that they had actually put their data in the public domain for trials that have ended, successful or not, accessible in an open way to the international community. This is called the Transparency Initiative. And most of the partners signing up to the Global Alliance are involved in that data sharing effort. So this, what's left in this year is we're going to try to organize, try to find some funding, finalize our constitution, and change our membership model to include individuals, not just organizations, universities, and so on. In this constitution, which is largely about membership and turnover and the usual, there is an article that says to be a member of this Global Alliance in the future, you have to respect the framework for responsible for the responsible sharing of genomic and health-related data. So there is going to be some sort of bottom line philosophy, if I can put it that way, some framework that members will have to agree to, and I'll get to that in a minute. So there's now 220 in 1 year that have joined onto this effort. It's lean, it has no money, as I said. There are 3 volunteer host organizations. One of them is Canadian, the Ontario Institute for Cancer Research, which actually is the administrative hub and has 1 executive and 2 assistants. They have created a transitional steering committee and 4 working groups. So what actually is the substance of this global alliance? And it's largely modeled, again, on the kind of effort that we saw in the 1990s with the Human Genome Project, where funders, foundations, universities, researchers, and so on all came together in a common effort to share pre-competitive data, to do preemptive, if you like, collaboration. So that's the kind of mood that prevails. The big challenge, however, is not the genomics people. They're used to sharing, whether they like it or not. They've gotten into the tradition of sharing, and particularly now with the International Rare Diseases Consortium and so on. It's more, will the clinicians follow? Will the clinicians sort of leap on and get away from my patients, my samples, my disease, my hospital, or whatever, or my publication, my patents? And this is the biggest challenge of bringing the clinical and the genomic communities together. So we have 4 working groups. The regulatory and ethics, which I chair with Kazuta Kato from Japan and Bartha Majumdar from India. Obviously, we have all the policy, privacy, security, consents, governance, and transparency work to do. The data group, they talk a language I don't understand, so I can't really, APIs and all sorts of things, which they are facilitating communication. The security group was while we want more data shared and more freely and more openly, we also have to make sure that it's secure. And finally, the clinical group, which is trying to find ways to, and I'll show you some projects, to begin to share data with via the data and security systems. So what are some of these projects? The first one's called Matchmaker, and here you can see some of the different databases that exist around the world, all of them working not in silos. Each one is an international consortium in and of itself, but they're either genotypic or they're phenotypic or they're IT kinds of collaborations. And the Matchmaker Exchange then works on bringing the geno and pheno worlds together in terms of identification of deleterious genes. Similarly, one of the big challenges, this only started 2 weeks ago, is to create a common open access BRCA database. We're all well aware of what happened with Myriad. Myriad, whose exclusive patent on the BRCA1 and BRCA2 gene was just recently overturned by the Supreme Court of the United States, but not before 9 years of free reign, if I can call it that, and not before Myriad is able to claim that they have the highest quality database in the world. And last week, the Australian courts upheld the Myriad patent. Irrespective, it's in its last days. And what the BRCA Challenge wants to do is create an equally high-quality international database on the BRCA1 and 2 genes through a federation, if you like, of existing data sets. Because often the consents given 20 years ago, 10 years ago, or even sometimes 5 years ago, are too narrow and too specific to allow for international sharing or it's simply because ethics committees are not creative enough to take the spirit of the consent of someone from a family who has a condition and wants to contribute to research but didn't mention the right disease to allow such data to be shared. And I must tell you, the breast cancer communities are often very upset when this kind of paternalistic attitude prevails and prevents international data sharing. So we also have various, one of them, other initiatives, one led by Canada, ICGC, at the bottom, International Cancer Genome Consortium. I wanted to mention the Beacon, which was on the last one, because that's another one that is so fascinating. I have to read it out to you. Beacon is sort of like a beacon. You think of Newfoundland, think of lighthouses and so on. We're on the theme of Newfoundland this morning. A beacon is a service designed to accept a query in the form of, do you have any genomes with an A, or X, Y, whatever, at position 100,735 on chromosome 3? Yes, no. And there are all these beacons being developed. It's beautiful. All right, so what are we doing in the Regulatory Ethics Working Group, which I chair and which is taking up 300% of my time? The consent issue is always coming up. It came up in the London meeting in March. Our consents are from the past. Can we still, what do we do with these legacy collections? Our consents are pretty good and modern, but we didn't mention cloud computing. We didn't mention genome sequencing. What clauses do we need to add? Our consents are no good at all. Give us something that'll carry us for the next 10 years. So that's the consent tasks for the consent task team. Safe haven, how do you define a platform, let's say dbGaP or ABI, that has certain attributes? So if you go to a funder and you say, my data is going there, or if you go to an ethics committee, you say, the data will be deposited there. What are the attributes needed that that platform will be considered safe, and your data, you don't have to bring in a 20-page security plan and so on. The 10-year project, the one that hopefully I don't have to complete, is called the Safe Harbor. How do we put in place an efficient, economical, ethical review system that responds to the new nature of international collaborative science? Let's just think Canada. Canada's 10 provinces. Having a national project here is like being in Europe. You actually, in multi-sites, as you know, often have to go through 22 ethics committees. Even in the province of Quebec for Cartagena, I went through 18 ethics committees, and they picked a social scientist to head a project on population genetics because everyone was so scared of it. Well, it actually, it wears you down. Out of a 3-year grant, you spend 18 months in front of ethics committees with contradictory opinions. Well, this is absolutely unconscionable. Data protection regulation, Europe is moving towards a more conservative interpretation of what is adequate protection before you're allowed to send data out of Europe. Snowden and NSA did not help. And in the new proposed directive, which is going to be a regulation means a law, directives you can interpret in different countries. If this goes into effect, there is no exemption for health research. You need an explicit, specific consent to sharing. Of course, people are working to make sure this doesn't happen. And finally, a privacy and security policy. Here's an example. The consents are going up. We've got clauses, generic clauses, templates, legacy consents. We've already put up some propositions for comment, and it's now being put into plain English, as they say. It's a framework I wanted to talk to you about. And the reason for this is that without this framework and without it being in the Constitution, you aren't transparent enough about what you're doing, and you don't have a shared philosophy about how you want to do it. So this idea of having a code of conduct started a while ago. It came from the biobanking people who said, okay, we built these biobanks, these population cohorts. How do we get access? How do we make sure people use it? These are public resources. This is infrastructure science supporting discovery science. And we had different publications that have come out, including a new idea in science on how ELSI, Ethics, Legal, Social Implications community, should get their act together and start being more modern and like genomic scientists and so on. What distinguishes this framework from any other declaration, typical code of conduct or whatever, is that this time we've decided to found the framework not on the endless debates in bioethics about that is not universal because it's Western bioethics, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to go straight to human rights. And we found 3 dormant rights. They're in the 1948 Universal Declaration on Human Rights. The right of all citizens to benefit from progress, from scientific advances, from scientific progress. The right for scientists to be recognized, attribution, therefore, and the right of scientific freedom. We are going to reactivate these rights so that they actually can be put into more. 166 countries ratified the 1976 Covenant on Social, Economic, and Cultural Rights that contained these 3 1948 declarations. Which means if they've ratified it and signed it and ratified it, it's politically actionable. And that is what's going to distinguish this framework from any other code of conduct declaration, etc., we hope. And now we're looking at different models for data sharing. Do we use binding corporate rules? Do we use contracts? Do we do this and that? And we're having a lot of fun learning from different communities, including commercial forms of data sharing. So finally, we have the foundational principles on the right. We decided not to define them, because as soon as we got into discussions between the Japanese, the Brazilians, the South Africans, and the Europeans and Americans and so on, everyone had a different, so we simply said, let's just put them out there as they stand naked with different meanings for different countries. We developed the core elements. Each of these core elements has 2 or 3 procedural but very high level interpretations, but enough to make sense. And finally, we put the framework up for comment. It's open for comment for another 2 weeks, and it's being translated into 5 languages. So on October 18th at our next meeting, which is going to be in San Diego just before ASHG, it'll be up in Chinese, validated, Japanese, validated, Spanish, validated, French, validated, and English. In time, I think, to really show that when we say global, we mean global. And to conclude, each of these, the framework then will be followed by more content-specific policies. So we've set up task teams to do one on consent. People want dynamic consent, they want electronic consent, they want tiered consent, they want broad consent, they want this, they want that, and they want to have different models that will be globally recognized and respected. Privacy and security is a big one. Governance, someone has said, we need a pediatric one. Others have said we need some for people with policy for people with dementia to make sure that, or rare diseases, to make sure that global efforts continue. And each policy starts with the framework, goes to the specific principles to their particular area, and then will offer procedural guidance. So there's lots of issues that are left. I don't think the Global Alliance will ever be a monitoring. I think you will only succeed based on your reputation, on the recognition of the common effort that goes into making these frameworks and these international efforts. If people don't want to share, the framework says this framework applies to those projects where there has been consent to data sharing. So it starts from the premise that there has been data sharing consented to. I don't think we can talk about individuals in these kinds of projects. We're talking about citizens, because a lot of it is a contribution to the common good. You want to put data in the public domain. You want it to be accessible, used. You want to further science, and you want the scientists recognized. So it's more how to ensure we get this into real health benefits for citizens. So in Canada, we have different structures. P3G, the Public Population Project in Genomics, has created IPAC, an International Policy Interoperability and Data Access Clearinghouse. And we've worked with different international consortia and Canadian to develop tools, generic tools that they can use for any kind of collaboration or project that they have, including a data access office where, as an independent, trusted third party, we can clear access requests. We've done this for the International Cancer Genome Consortium. We're doing it for the International Human Epigenome Consortium, and so on and so on. Canada, ending with Canada, is home, as you know, to the International Cancer Genome Consortium, 74 projects, and the policy base and everything was developed here. The Data Access Office is in Canada. We're also seeing the end of a very successful network in Canada, which is the stem cell network. Like all NCEs, they have a 14-year lifespan. We have over 1,900 trainees in the stem cell network since it was launched in 2001, with 39 institutions in 8 countries and so on. I think as Canadians, we're good at networking. And I can remember in the 1980s, everybody would always say, Canada is where we want to do our clinical trials, because you guys really know how to get along and share and so on. And this was a comment usually by Americans. So, in conclusion, I'd just like to quote from, just to make sure you don't think that we're inventing stuff, that UNESCO in 2009, in its statement on the right to enjoy the benefits of scientific progress and its application, stated, "The duty to respect the right to enjoy the benefits of scientific progress and its applications should include the respect of the freedom of the scientific community and its individual members to collaborate with others, both within and across countries' borders, including the free exchange of information, research ideas, and results." Thank you.
Time for a couple of questions. Yes.
Bartha, thank you. Alan Becker, University of Manitoba. You've presented a really exciting potential future against which there are, I think, a degree of inordinate but important problems that we must solve. The best example coming from some birth cohort work that we're doing and have linked with a consortium predominantly in Europe, focused with consent of our families on asthma and allergies, only to receive a manuscript about to go to the publisher on bipolar disorder, taken from the databases that were established. The ethics committees really have a difficulty with this for several reasons, not the least of which is that although difficult, it's not impossible, even with anonymized databases, to identify individuals. And secondly, the broader area of consent in the broadest possible manner and its potential implication for recruitment of families when the consent is as broad as we would like to see for the benefit of mankind, as many of the journals are now demanding. So I'd welcome your comments on how to deal with these issues that are really coming to a head in terms of colliding in a really negative manner.
Mm-hmm. I'll give you a personal comment and then more of an academic one. I think one value that Canadians have is our universal healthcare system and its accessibility, portability, and all the other things in the old Canada Health Act, as we heard yesterday. It's still a uniting Canadian value. And I think the sustainability of the system is in jeopardy right now. And I think, it sounds pie in the sky, that big data will allow us to stratify, to have the sample size and data that allow us to stratify to target. So we don't do like Quebec did in H1N1, everybody had to go vaccinate. No one knew who was at risk, who was a resistor, who was a super transmitter, and so on. We need to have the kind of data that allows our healthcare systems to actually program healthcare delivery, prevention, everything, protection in a stratified, targeted way. So I think if Canadians say by sharing your data at the risk that you might be stigmatized, at the risk that you might be re-identified, which are always risks and always will be, do you still agree? And then for future biomedical research as approved by an ethics committee, that's a standard clause. What I see as a researcher is that we're moving from consent and overemphasis on consent to governance. If you're going to make that leap of faith and have broad consent, put in place a governance system, oversight, monitoring, and so on. We're seeing a switch from privacy, you know, me, myself, my privacy. Ask anybody under 30 what privacy means. We're seeing a switch from privacy to security. So as a researcher, the emphasis will be more on what have you put in place as much as is technologically possible. Don't promise total privacy. Don't promise total anonymity forever and ever. Just say, well, we'll use ongoing way the best security mechanisms we can find.
Was there, yes, Paul Hebert?
Thanks, Bartha. That's really good. Yeah, I'm sold. It's just too actionable. I'm at the point of action. So actionable steps. In Canada, how will you engage Tri-Council and the new TCP in this new framework, which sounds really amazing? Question one, or comment one. And the second thing is medical journal editors. It seems to me they could be a powerful force for change in this new paradigm. Several of them really like this general concept of sharing information, as you well know. The ICMJE is meeting very shortly. They need a new cause.
Be pleased to talk to them about this one. We haven't yet, as Canada, made a definitive step on our, we could easily take leadership here if we just, what did someone say yesterday? Get on with it or move it, make it happen. We still have a lot of, we're still a trustworthy. The Europeans, as you know, have been very upset about what's happened with data. And so we still occupy a very special position. We just need to put our funding agencies behind it. This is not expensive. This is coordination. It's dissemination of information. It's sharing of ideas coming from volunteers. So I think there is a chance right now, an opportune political moment for Canadians to say, we've done the ICGC, we've shown we can network, we've got responsible, we haven't had breaches here, to actually take some leadership here and move with this. And yes, we do need the journal editors behind us for sure, because like funders, they carry a lot of clout.